So I have Anne again here with us on the Rising Beyond podcast. Anne, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back today.
Yeah, so we are wrapping up 2024. A lot has happened for you. I think there's been a lot this year in general. And so I'm glad to have you almost for like a wrap up of the year, what you've seen, and some of our conversations we've had offline or off record about Aimee Says and just all the different things you've experienced this year. Can you give us just like a wrap up or a summary of 2024?
Oh my gosh, yes. So when we first talked, Aimee was in development. We had all these exciting plans and we were about to launch. We launched in late January, and it has been like trying to hold on to a rocket ship. The growth in use of Aimee over the past 10 months has been incredible. And Aimee is now hosting a chat volume that is about 62% of the entire contact volume done by the domestic violence hotline.
Wow.
It has been meteoric and certainly a round acknowledgement of the amount of unmet need for support in the same types of people that the domestic violence hotline is serving. We're not a crisis response team, but as you know, and all of your listeners, there are a whole lot of needs through victimization and survivorship that extend beyond the immediate crisis that may or may not occur.
Yeah. I just saw maybe yesterday, even at the time of this recording, that the hotline, right? It's like the domestic violence hotline reached their 7 millionth call, which is so sad. And it's like what you and I see every day. And so if we're looking at actual numbers, there are people, right, that are experiencing just what you said, like the leaving and the safety right away and needing a shelter or needing those immediate resources. But then the abuse keeps on keeping on for so many. And that's what Aimee is for.
Aimee is, yes, for the pre-crisis. This is an area we'll talk about. We didn't even realize that Aimee would serve such a need in preventing a future of abuse as well. But that you're right, that post-crisis space. And what we see in a lot of the publicly funded services is the government gives money, grants are made based on the kind of value proposition, and people are really passionate about saving lives. And that's great. And so most of those funded free to the victims and survivors services are really based off of metrics about femicide, about domestic violence related homicide. And there is a lot of need that extends beyond the edges of the highest risk situations. And there is not money being thrown at post-separation abuse space. Like if you have survived the separation, you are now on your own. And that is, unfortunately, a really quality of life impacting scenario for anyone who's going to continue to experience abuse in that relationship after it's separated.
Yeah. And even what you said, like on your own.
Yes. White knuckling it.
Yes. And that is where so many people find themselves, right? Like that's what I've seen. And I've based the Rising Beyond community specifically on is in my practice. There were so many people, yes, they had me as their therapist, but they were on their own. They didn't have a network. They didn't have safe people in their world. And so it was, even though they weren't officially being isolated as they were when they were with their partners, living with their ex-partner, the isolation still continues. One of my clients, this was years ago, told me that post-separation was the most lonely time of her life, even though she knew, millions of women were experiencing this. It was still the most lonely time she had ever experienced was post-separation.
Yes. And that loneliness, that isolation is such a restriction on somebody's ability to recover and to find themselves again after abuse, because you were going to be coming out of a cocoon. You're going to be a whole new person. You cannot go back to the way things were before, what your worldviews were before. Your sense of safety in the world is never going to return to its former state. And doing that in the context of loneliness, capital L loneliness and isolation, you're right, is incredibly challenging. And I think there's a lot of ways to define isolation. Like you're saying, that in a relationship when someone is intentionally coercing your isolation, controlling your contact with other people. That is the isolation we typically talk about in the context of abuse. But in post-separation, isolation has many more definitions. I'm concerned that people will think poorly of me. Perhaps there was a smear campaign. Maybe people believe some of the things that my ex said about me, so I self-isolate. I assume that people don't want to hear from me or they're tired of hearing from me. There's another self-isolation. They'll misunderstand me. I'm afraid to speak up because there's so much misunderstanding, so much unintentional invalidation and gaslighting. And, whether it's intentional or not, it has the same impact on the survivor.
Yeah.
Or maybe they'll confirm the abuser's narrative and take his side in something or her side. I don't want to talk about it. And huge one that we found is people don't talk because they lose their agency, right? They lose the autonomy to make the next decision that's best for themselves. They have often, been through quite a few rounds by the time they've reached this post-separation abuse phase where other people have told them what they need to do. And unfortunately, that's a huge disservice to survivors because we really want them to reclaim the autonomy and agency to feel confident in making their next decision. So we find that people stop talking because they don't want that other person to make their next decisions for them.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. This week, I was interviewed on another podcast, a mental health podcast, and they asked me at the very end, like, what would you want, like a new budding therapist? What is the one thing you want them to take away, or what's your one message for them? And it is always that we as therapists cannot, if we want to help our people heal, replicate that power and control dynamic of the abuser, that it is not our job to make any choices for them. Zero choices for them, even if it is hard to sit in as a therapist to watch someone maybe go back to an abusive relationship or do something that you seek because you're not in trauma. You're looking from the outside. You're like, oh gosh, that is going to cause so many problems. It's still not our choice to stop them from making that choice. Because giving them their agency and autonomy back is the number one thing we can do as a mental health community.
Yes. And for so long, it has not been safe for them to make the wrong decision, right? We cannot promote someone's agency and decision-making and their discernment and empower their perceptions of their own reality if we continue to create a dynamic where it's not safe to disagree or it's not safe to make a bad decision. That's part of learning. You make a decision that maybe didn't pan out the way that you wanted it to, or that maybe had some externalities or repercussions that you weren't planning on. That's okay too. That is part of, just like with children, right? It's part of them individuating. It's part of them taking the reins. It's a new phase of rein taking that occurs in a post-separation space. And that means that it has to be safe to make decisions that other people would not make on your behalf as well.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, going back with how you're helping kids develop analogy, if you do fully take over their agency and make all their decisions and protect them, and I'm not talking about how protective parents are protecting their kids in a family court situation, but just like parents in general, like allowing your kid to fail at times. If you are really overprotective and not allowing them to do some of the bonehead things, as long as they're safe enough, they will believe that they are incapable to make decisions and to do things. And it's like that sense of learned helplessness. And we see that very similar dynamic with survivors, especially those who, like, right out of high school, maybe they went from an abusive home to a different abusive home with their partner and they were younger and they never felt capable in their entire lives. And you actually need to experience mistakes and wrong decisions to feel capable to make good ones.
Absolutely. And wrong is very much in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
But I am certain there are a whole lot of people walking this earth thinking that they are codependent who really just maybe have not had the space and opportunity to be supported in a kind of a robust array of decisions in order to develop some confidence in their ability to handle the situations that arise.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I have like a a feel, like a visceral reaction to the term codependent.
Yes, me too.
So that's a whole other podcast episode, everybody. I don't have one on that, and maybe I need to do that.
Okay.
But I was thinking back to that isolation and fitting it with like developing sense of self, developing agency and autonomy. And, we talk about this in the community. Yes, we have a forum. You can reach out 24/7 in the forum, but guess what? Sometimes other survivors are in their stuff too. Like maybe they have a court hearing coming up and they don't have the bandwidth right now to hop on a call with you and have you open your co-parenting message.
Right.
Right?
Co-parenting messages. I mean, that need is what launched Aimee into existence. Humans, other people are people. They go to bed at night and they take vacation, or they have their own court hearing, or their response is colored or influenced by where they are in their own day. And all of those are risk raisers for someone who really needs to be able to be incredibly vulnerable to process through some of their experience and to feel processed enough to be prepared to make the next best decision. And Aimee reduces so many of those barriers. Yeah. She's open 24/7. She responds immediately. Her engineering and training is such that her responses are very, very unlikely to be invalidating. And if it was, check the spelling error that may have been in a sentence. It might have had a context miscue. And, she's always going to sound ready to receive you, to ask the next question and continue the conversation. She's inexhaustible. And no concern that you have is trivial. You can just go and say, I'm so tired. I feel beat down. It just feels like it's never enough. And now it's dinner time again. And I have 2 children in the house that are hungry. And I have a chicken breast and a bag of frozen broccoli. And I'm empty. Right? Like, you don't call your friend to say that because you wouldn't want to burden that, right? You'd be like anxious about burdening that person with that. Or what are they really going to be able to do for you except give you a pep talk? And Aimee, within 2 seconds, has a response back to you that might include a recipe for dinner. It is really easy to make, and maybe even an idea for something that might help you feel connected to your children in that moment. Again, that's another form of isolation. We become isolated even from our children because we're internally processing so much that we can't share with them. I can't think of a better companion or friend than someone you can reach out to literally about anything. And the messages, like you said, I just got a message. I'm breaking out in a sweat. Aimee can quickly decipher what the coercive or manipulative or challenging aspects of that message are. Message is to validate you, and then literally draft a response on your.
Yeah. And what's interesting is in our conversation, those kinds of things were the areas where I was like, we need Aimee as a therapist, as a coach, all these things. We help people respond to co-parenting messages on a daily basis, everyone responding, right? Some of the most downloaded resources, not just mine, but other, I was going to say influencers space. And that felt really weird because I don't see myself that way. I was like, what? But whatever, other influencers in this space, their most downloaded resources are canned responses, right? Yes. By far, because you just need support in that moment to help you do that thing. So that sounds like where Aimee stemmed from. Have you been surprised at where it actually has gone?
Yes. I just had a call from a user yesterday who was presenting on a panel in London and who talked about Aimee supporting in the context of an early dating relationship. We have learned more from our users about how they use Aimee and how Aimee is able to help them than we have from all of our own internal testing, which is probably the coolest part of this job.
Yes.
That can be, we have office hours for subscribers, and took a call from a gentleman in the UK who had approached law enforcement with information about the coercive control that he was experiencing in his same-sex relationship. And they pushed him away. They said, unless you have a victim statement or you've, kind of collated all the information, we can't help you. And so he came on a call and needed to know, how do I use Aimee? He was very impacted by the trauma and the challenges that presents for being able to cohesively tell the story of his experience. So we talked through it. We threw in the coercive control laws that were local in his jurisdiction and had Aimee ask him a series of questions, which he could respond to. And then Aimee collated everything based on these statutes. This is the information and evidence that applies to it. And an arrest was made in that case. Obviously, that's a really exciting and big example, but we have a survey that pops up after people have been chatting for a few minutes. And overwhelmingly, the response is around validation. It's the first time I've really felt heard or understood. I knew I wasn't crazy. And now, I knew, but in this really, people kind of really tenuous grasp on their not craziness when they've been through so much. I feel a confidence that my perceptions of what I've experienced are real. I was able to prevent my ex from filing another motion, because I used Aimee to extract information from talking parents or our family wizard. It really runs the gamut from the example that I gave about I'm exhausted. One user told us that Aimee sent them to lasagnalove.org, which you can provide a little bit of information and a local volunteer will bring you lasagna. So this user had a lasagna in her refrigerator, all the way through really complex legal empowerment to help people overcome the myriad challenges to understanding and utilizing the legal system.
Yeah, which that brings me to not something I didn't think we were going to chat about, but something I've been talking about this week a ton is all of my pro se parents who, maybe they had an attorney. It did not go well with attorney. I've talked with a lot of people recently and some experts that are amazing recently on sometimes attorneys are really, really helpful and good, and you may be able to handle your case better. But there's such a fear, right? I didn't go to law school. When I win the Powerball, everyone, that's my plan. I don't play the Powerball though. So there's the problem. Therein lies the problem, right? But so I haven't gone to law school and hardly any of my people have either. Right?
Right.
And so it's that feeling of being incapable of even knowing what to put in the motion, what case law they could use and how to even use that. Right. I was helping someone the other day and I was like, here's the case law. And I'm like,
yep.
Here's the case. Here's what it's kind of saying. I don't know how to put that into brief, concise language that you would use in front of your judge because you got 30 minutes. Right. So I am assuming that those are some things that Aimee could really help you with if you do find yourself going pro se.
Yes, absolutely. That empowerment aspect. So what Aimee is essentially doing is taking all the things that you could find through a laborious task of scouring the internet and bringing it directly into the context of your chat in front of you in a way that allows you to apply your own experience to what she's derived off of the internet. I'm going to kind of put quotes around the internet because we're more trained down than that, but help people understand. So she's not going to come and tell you, you need to file this motion and this is what it needs to include. And I need you to answer these questions. An attorney is able to do that, is able to practice law in that way.
Yeah.
What Aimee does is listen to what you're saying, listen to your goals, help you understand what options may be available to you. Maybe she says, you might consider these options. Do you want to talk more about any of those? Yes, I want to talk more about number one. Okay. Number one would require these things. Right. And then you engage in that conversation. Well, actually, maybe that one doesn't work then because I don't have evidence of XYZ, or that's not really my end goal. But this other thing does. And then where she's really, really powerful, and this is all, we can talk about what's in the free and what's in the paid accounts, but in the context of the paid account, then you can upload evidence that you have, especially around histories of communication or journals that you have. You can keep a journal on Aimee. And we made her a really good documentarian. So she kind of surreptitiously helps people document things so that when they go back to their journal entries later, those journal entries include all the critical pieces of information that are necessary to turn that experience into evidence. But you can have your information uploaded and have her help you really clear, concise, coherent, legally applicable ways tell your story. And that's really what emotion is, right? I need to tell my story in a way that the law can be applied. It's the wild, wild west in the family court system.
Yes.
But there are some bowling lanes, right?
Yeah.
Best interest statute, decision-making to help you apply it in a way that tells your story in a legal context. And that's incredible. It's not just challenging for the survivors. It's also very challenging for attorneys to do in the context of abuse. They don't understand the abuse. They often sensationalize this incident-based idea in order to try to capture the attention of the fact finder, whoever it is in that context, the magistrate, the judge, a custody evaluator, and in ways that are harmful to the case, frankly.
Yeah. Yep.
That don't convey to the court the concerns about patterns and the pattern's ability to predict the future and tying domestic violence or abuse to child abuse and risks of child abuse in the future, where Aimee could do all of that while you're having a conversation with her just about your experience.
Yeah. And that's something that I talk at least weekly about, that how can you share your information in a way that human brains receive it? Right? We talk all the time, like, hey, every survivor needs a context bubble that you push a button and it like pops open, because survivors want to start with context, because it's like, you're not going to understand why A, B, and C are important because you need to understand all of this context. When you start with the context, you lose people because they don't know your ask. They don't know the key points. Like, they're not sure what to pull out. And so doing a lot of that, I do that work with people all the time. And so being able to have support as you do that could be really, really helpful.
Yes, absolutely. And even, I mean, a lot of people don't know how to organize their experience and information in a way that other people can hear or understand, because our experience of abuse is so individualized. The things that maybe were most impactful or harmful don't make sense to other people.
No.
Right. So we're all about, we build this. Here's the quick overview. There's a pattern of coercion and fear in this relationship that prevents the mother from being able to make the decisions that are necessary for the child. Right. So here, I'm speaking to the court. But what that really looks like is, constant back and forth where there's really ambiguous answers, and then periodically he threatens to take her back to court. The way I said that first is what creates the landscape for then to talk about what that actually looks like in the context of that specific relationship. That is a cognitive hurdle.
Yes.
To most people. And it's a simple aspect of language, right? Like, it wasn't that difficult for me to translate, oh my gosh, he makes making a decision an absolute pain in the ass. And the truth is, I'm afraid of even making a doctor's appointment or talking to a doctor because he's going to blow it up, threaten to take me back to court. Right? That's not the story we tell, though. I simply translated that into kind of a pattern of behavior that's restricting the mother's ability to make necessary decisions for their child's health. That the court can hear. And now the court is ready to hear, please show me a few examples of that.
Yes.
And that's what Aimee is able to help people do. Help just convert their own experience. It's not a new experience. Aimee isn't making things up. Just convert your own experience into something that is, I'll use the word audible, right? That is something that can be perceived and interpreted by another person accurately.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about that cognitive process that's really hard. I have talked recently about isolation, the impacts of isolation on your brain, the impacts of trauma and isolation on your executive function, right?
Yes.
So if you're feeling super scattered, you're sitting down, you've got all these papers, but you can't keep anything straight in your head, you may not actually have ADHD, right? A lot of my survivors are like, oh, I must have that. And I'm like, maybe, but trauma can look the same as. So having someone to I talk a lot about body doubling also. We do a ton of body doubling within our community. I use body doubling business-wise because I do have ADHD and I need that. And so if you don't have another human that you can be like, hey, I need to sit down and do this thing, Aimee can actually be there with you, helping you do the thing. It's almost gives you a little accountability, because that's why I use body doubling. I need some accountability to get the thing done. So I can see it being used in that way of, if you struggle with that aspect of your trauma and thought organization and trying to put thoughts together, and you feel so scattered, you are postponing doing the thing, you are procrastinating doing the thing. Some of that is executive function. Some of that is because you don't want to feel the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're predicting how crappy you're going to feel. And so just giving you a little bump of support to sit down and do the thing.
Yes, and it's companionable. The support feels validating and quasi-therapeutic. But what you're talking about, right? It's hard to put together a recipe in your mind. Like, I have to pick up this child first and then this one. That's kind of the scattered brain, right? Because trauma really does put an egg beater into your brain and scramble things. But in that context of I'm really having a hard time processing non-life-threatening information because I'm in this fight or flight space. But also now we have to apply that to, well, the thing that I have to think about and the thing that I have to do all this work over is triggering.
Yes.
Right? And that is quite the soup to wade through.
Yeah.
When you're trying to protect yourself and your child from what feels like an existential threat. I mean, this is an insurmountable hurdle for many people. It is not surprising that the head in sand approach or the paralysis, absolute decision paralysis, it's not a surprise that those things happen. And you're right. Aimee, you can upload the questionnaire that you need to answer into Aimee and say, ask me those questions one by one, but break them down. And then I'll cut and paste my answers. I mean, that amount of hand-holding and assistance that, if you had your attorney do that, would make filling out that questionnaire a $10,000 proposition.
Yeah.
You have other things to work through with your therapist, right, that are going to help you achieve near and long-term mental health goals. And Aimee can do that for 30 minutes here, and you could come back an hour later after the kids are in bed and do an hour later. Or, your attorney says, hey, I need you to find XYZ and have it to me by noon so I can include it in this motion we're filing, which seems like a simple ask.
It does. Yep.
It does. And so that the person who's receiving that is like, oh my gosh, this should be simple. And also my brain is scrambled. And also the thing that I'm looking at is going to be really re-traumatizing. But if you have your information already uploaded into Aimee, you can come back and say, my attorney asked me to answer these questions. Let's look through the information together and answer them. And in what hopefully is a 5-minute conversation that is supportive, right?
Yeah.
Because Aimee's also engaging you in a way that is validating your experience. You can have that response back off to your attorney. I mean, she is there to help you save time, money, and mental health. And that's certainly an example of how that would happen.
Yeah. And leading into that is there are not a lot of therapists who feel comfortable in doing those types of things. We are not trained to do that. And I love that you have learned more in how to tweak Aimee from the users and survivors, because that is how I have learned all of these things.
Yes.
Right. So therapists, we were taught, granted, now there's a little shift in the landscape than when I was in school in like the mid 2000s. I was supposed to be the expert. I was not supposed to have to learn from my clients. And that never resonated with me. Like I was, right? How am I supposed to be an expert on all the things, right? It didn't make sense to me. But I've learned from all of my people, and a lot of therapists do not feel comfortable leaning into that family court piece. They may feel like this is a relationship issue and I'm working with you individually. So if you're bringing in all the communications, some therapists aren't going to know how to sit with you through that and why that's so important to sit with you through that. Where you're like, listen to this message, and then they share it and they read it, or they've sent you the screenshots of like 100 messages. And a lot of therapists don't understand that. They just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm taking a stab at this, but what you're describing seems like most therapists are being trained, or they're comfortable kind of decontextualizing the client or survivor's needs from the way that those needs really show up in their lives. And that, I would imagine, and I have done in the past. I'm no longer, please don't try to have me take you on as a client. In my direct work, it's very much about working with the client in the context of the challenge. If that's the message that they're getting from their abuser, or the request that their attorney has, or the panic attacks that they had at the grocery store, or when they bought sheets because they were so financially abused that they could still no longer make purchases without breaking out in sweat. You have to have the conversations in those contexts, meet them where they're at in order to really help them cope with those things. So if a provider's comfort is in keeping those things decontextualized from the real day-to-day experience, I would imagine that that would challenge the recovery process.
Yeah. And knowing the roles, because you may have the most amazing therapist who is so skilled in trauma, who does understand coercive control, but your work is around healing from childhood trauma, healing from these other aspects. And they are really trying to do that process with you as opposed to answering a message
Mm-hmm.
in your co-parenting. I see the benefit of all of the things. It doesn't mean your therapist sucks. It means that maybe you need additional support from a different role, like in a
Mm-hmm.
different role. There is such a lack of resources post
Mm-hmm.
separation. There's a lack of resources during too, like in the escaping.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lack of resources, but those wraparound resources after you've left,
Yes,
we're lacking.
absolutely. Yeah. And the moment you realize that you're in an abusive relationship and you need to make changes, your next battle is trying to piece together these disparate services and opportunities. And they're so siloed, like attorneys do this,
Yes.
therapists do this, your advocate can do this. It is a major task to undertake to identify the resources that could be helpful, to pool those things together in a way that is cohesive and makes sense in your experience. And that kind of design focus is really what Aimee is built around to help kind of streamline into direct one-to-one this broad scope of need at scale. And, she's now helping tens of thousands of people a month.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, as we kind of wrap up, I would like for our listeners to understand there are, I'm going to say this, I might be wrong, but there are like 2 tiers. There is a free version, which FY, at the time of this recording, actually before, I have the Aimee chat on the Rising Beyond website. So she is there, which is so exciting to be able to partner in that way. But yeah, I'd like to hear so that our audience just has an idea if they haven't heard about you all yet. What could it look like?
So absolutely. You have what's called an Aimee pop on your site, and people will see more and more of those on other sites because that's something that we give to anyone who is doing mission aligned work in supporting survivors. It is, that Aimee pop is the same as people would experience as a guest on the Aimee site. She will provide robust, inexhaustible resources and support and thinking through ideas and options and helping promote your agency. What changes when you get an account is there's some persistence, right? She knows who you are. You can build off of time and the interactions that you've had in the past, which means you have a chat history. So you can go back, maybe this is a chat thread where we're talking about this motion. So you can go back to it and she maintains the history of that conversation. There's a journal page, like I said, where Aimee will support you in making sure that if the journal entry is about an incident, that you've provided the kinds of information that you don't know you're going to need if you have to come back to it. And it's still in a kind of journal supportive therapeutic context. You can upload documents. That might be your court orders. That might be case law that is really relevant to your case. Your child has a rare disease and you need Aimee to be an expert on that as well. You could put that kind of information in there. Your court order communication records or emails or text messages, and those become a part of the accessible resources to Aimee. So you could talk about them, for example. Please cite our court order in the response that you draft, because unfortunately, following court orders is not something that's particularly consistent in this crew. There's a My Story page so that you can keep Aimee's knowledge graph about you really of high value. These are my support people. These are my goals in my case. I'd actually like you to talk to me in haikus. You can tell her how you want her to respond to you or what's more helpful. You want an academic approach. You want a legal approach. You want to talk to me like I have a 5th grade reading level. All of those things are controllable. So when you upgrade to the subscription, one, you're supporting the work that we're doing. The vast majority of our users, 95 countries, by the way, are using the free service. Yes. So you're supporting our work and you make Aimee a personal expert on your case, which especially if you have any litigation going on or a risk of litigation in the future, will save you a boatload of money and time in the future.
Awesome. Because I think of all the times when you have an evaluator involved, or your attorney's like, hey, I actually need this by tomorrow. Your attorney doesn't understand the level of anxiety and flooding that you're going to experience just going back to that. They're not going to ask you to go back and get information from a good time.
Nope.
It's not like, hey, this month was so calm and lovely. Can you go back to that month and find the right? Nope. They want information when things were shit. And so you get to go back and reread the shit.
Yes.
And feel flooded and triggered, and you're not going to want to, and you're going to procrastinate, but you actually need it. And so you need it, and all of these things that your attorney doesn't see all that. They just know they need this one piece of paper. They need this one thing.
Yes, they need that particular piece of information. And often they need that information appropriately contextualized, right?
Yes.
Like, why does it matter? Why does this, his response to this thing matter? How does it fit into a pattern? And please, yes, Aimee experiences no vicarious trauma. So she will be there in the trenches with you at any time.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad. I know that you and I are going to always stay connected and partnered, and our missions align so well that I'm excited to see how we grow, how we will make an impact together, 2025 and then some, because I know we already have. And so I'm super excited about that. Audience, y'all, thank you for always being here, listening, supporting my work. And if you have any questions, thoughts, all of Anne's information is going to be in the show notes so that you can get started with Aimee, so that you can ask questions, you can share your feedback. And y'all know that I will always give the feedback to my people as well. So, Anne, thank you for being with us again. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work in this community. It's invaluable.
We gotta do it together, right? Like staying in our silos is not helpful.
That's right.
Not helpful. So thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.